Bueno, va a ser una mesa.
It's going to be a quite short roundtable. We just have 10 minutes. We are going to read the questions that have been written to us, to the chat. A question for Don Rafael. How do you believe that one could help others to be prepared individually to then know how to give yourself? Connects with another question, can we link the individuality that you have been speaking about with the relational dimension of the person? Because this is going to allow us to make family. These are two questions at the same time. It's a pity we have little time, because listening to what I've heard now, many things have, question marks have arisen, complex questions. It's a pity to have so little time. My first book, for instance, published in 1969 and written in June 68, dealt about May 68, the generation of protesting. And here we have given a vision that doesn't correspond to what I lived there, experienced at that time. That's the advantage of my age. And as to the question, the individual is always relational. The fact of being an individual, to be divided, no, to be one, only one can bind to another one. In order to be united, we have to be one. What is one single thing can't be united. So one single flesh was seemed a metonymia or a rhetoric figure. To be united, we have to be one. As the more one we are, the deeper is the union and binding with the other. So that's why when I've heard as well this afternoon attacking generic individualism is then destroyed, disappears, because the only way of organizing the individual is from the individual himself, not from outside the individual. What we don't do on our own, nobody's going to do for us. Absolutely nobody. Everything starts from the same personality and the same desire. And with respect to the first question, how to do it? Well, being a relational individual, being linked with those persons or related with those persons in whom you discover the good. This is friendship. That's friendship. I think that friendship, we should have to talk a lot about friendship. Friendship was more important than justice in a society, and it is true, because friendship is what gives peace, and then justice has been fulfilled. And charity gives me more than justice, complying with justice. The individual, when relating to others, to other people, who have values of good and beauty, that's another issue that is also very important. In the Western world, we don't pay too much attention to beauty as in the Eastern countries. But beauty is absolutely fundamental for the health of the soul. So this relation with people, with truth, beauty, and goodness is what prepares for that union. Thank you very much. Now there is a question for Maria de la Calle. Could you develop a little bit more the positive aspects that we can find after this criticism of the sexual revolution? How to achieve, to be able to talk more about the positive aspects that the revolution sexual gives us and not so much about the negative aspects? How could we develop those more positive aspects of this revolution? Hello, good afternoon. Yes, as Dr. Chiva explained to us at the beginning on the program of this Congress, I see that all this will be developed. And this afternoon, Christopher West was going to talk about the beauty of sexuality. At any rate, I would like to insist on something that I mentioned before as well. And that is that I think we have to bear in mind that we are addressing many different people that it is difficult to reach with a mere metaphysical discourse. And I think that that's why the way of beauty or the path of beauty is a very valuable one that we have to exploit. And also the value of the path of experience. On Friday, well, the good is something that is contagious. And as soon as we can see and verify the happiness in other families, in other people, then there is a contagious effect. I don't mean by that that we should have to renounce to other things or not, but maybe it's not the entry port nor the initial connection port either. I think we have to explore very well this path of beauty and path of experience. Maybe the path of beauty and experience could generate a context for the perception that is part of the sexual life. And another question for Professor Daniel Granada was if you consider the physical attraction or physical sex appeal could be considered as the first level of what can then be love. And this person is interested in the issue of adolescents, teenagers. Many teenagers jump from attraction to sex very rapidly. Maybe you could talk about that a little bit more. Thank you.
Well, this is what Dr. Lacalle has just pointed out. In other words, the experience or the unity of one's experience. So talking about the importance of not reducing that experience, but rather of addressing it as a whole and knowing that one level should be conducive to another, and that at the initial level we already have the germ of what is to eventually happen. In other words, the totality of the experience. So the first step is, in fact, has to do with a sexual attraction, and it's going to be a reception of the sexual values. Although you must understand what that means in an in-depth manner, and therefore, well, you should try to prove how or show how that sexuality is included in the context of the person, etc. And what we are doing is climbing that ladder that Levis pointed out. So we should move from the sexual values to the affective values and even to the personal and religious values, where, according to what he says, what is down below is supported by what is up above. But in any case, many times we're talking about the integration of sexuality that is produced by personal recognition. And I think that well, we have to interpret the experience. You have to make us think. Love should make us think, because this experience should make us question ourselves on what's happening and why we feel attracted to somebody. And in this investigation, I think that we're going to discover some very important things. Thank you very much. Well, so there's another question now for Professor Marta Albert. Well, it's all about make love and not war. And this person says that sometimes there's people mix things up. So how can we not mix these things up? And so what could we do about this, or what can be done about this? And that's the question, basically. Well, perhaps Dr. Granada could also answer this question. Well, yes. Let's say that this expression contains a different connotation, and there are other expressions in our language too that refer to sexual relationships that don't have an affective component or don't have an emotional component, I think. And well, there's no commitment, and there's no mutual surrender, so to speak. But I think that, well, we distinguish this perfectly well. But the problem is, are we worried about the difference between one thing and another? And well, what I also think is that what is equally important is to focus on another issue that I was pointing out towards the end of the presentation, and that is, on the one hand, these are completely different things, and on the other, well, let's say that they are not separate, or they shouldn't be separate. And so if we take sex seriously, what I was appealing to is that the difference becomes very hazy, and I would like to focus much more on this than on the other issue. So what I believe is that, well, considering the situation of our youth and considering where we are heading, in other words, these are relationships without any intimacy. I don't know how to say this, and I think that what we have to do is, well, we have to push in the other direction. I suppose, well, some of you might be thinking, well, what are you talking about? But that's what I think we should do, and that sex is a marvelous treasure that has to be discovered and has to be known. And instead of, well, feeling worried about it or whatever. Sorry, sound is getting pretty bad now. It's a pity that we don't have more time. But we see negative phenomena, and then we then establish categories, and we talk about as if it were the whole. As I said before, and in reality, today, like yesterday and in the past, there have been all sorts of things. And I was remembering this because of all this business about make love and not war. I remember that the youngsters of 1960 believed that they were inventing something, but in the 5th century before Christ, Aristophanes headed by Isistata, what they did to put an end to the war of the Peloponnese, they declared a sex war with the husbands, and the husbands couldn't cope anymore, and that's when the war came to an end. So that is make love, not war. But anyway, that's what I wanted to say about this. But okay, well, thank you very much for this panel discussion, and many thanks for the lectures too. And we are now going to move on to the next session.
Gracias.